What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Here we are with another reaction. In this, we have why the British think they're not part of Europe. Before we dive in, if you guys happen to enjoy, please don't forget to subscribe, give the video a thumbs up. Also, if you like to support the channel by becoming a member, all you gotta do is hit the join button to receive your exclusive benefits. See right to it.
So, a question that I get all the time, especially since living in Germany, is why do the British think that they are not part of Europe? And I get it, it's a fair question. And to most Europeans, the answer feels obvious. You're on the map, you're just across the channel. Of course, you're part of Europe.
Gotta be.
But
Right?
geographic proximity does not dictate identity, and identity isn't about logic, it's emotional. And the truth is, the UK has never seen itself as European. And now, before people freak out in the comments, I get it. The UK itself is somewhat divided on this issue. Scotland feels closer to Europe than Wales or England does. And the government's actions do not always represent the will of the majority of people. But for simplicity's sake, I am just going to talk about the UK and British identity as a whole.
Okay.
So even before Brexit, people spoke about Europe and the UK like they were two separate entities. Nobody says Europe and France, or Europe and Spain, or Europe and Germany, but Europe and the UK, that just kind of rolls off the tongue like it's always been the case. And when I moved to Germany over a decade ago, I came up against this misunderstanding very often. Germans would tell me all the time that, of course, the UK is Europe, not as a gesture of inclusion, but just as a matter of fact. I think this is why Brexit was particularly painful for the Germans, and I had many situations where people were personally upset with me. They felt really hurt, as if this was some kind of divorce they never got a say in. Now, just before we go any further, I am not your average Brit because I have lived outside of the UK now for almost 20 years. And in fact, I've almost lived outside longer than I have lived within the borders of the UK. And this changes you on a fundamental level. I feel very connected to Europe and also to the UK, but this is the exception. Not many people feel this way. Ask an average Brit.
So I do get where he's coming from, and when I watch Brits, they feel like they're separate from Europe in a way. And I know they're separate from the EU now, but they're still in Europe. But I can see, and I mean, when you look at British history, just British history, not European history, just British, they've done so much and they've been so powerful and they've helped shape this world so much that I guess they feel like they should be their own entity, their own, yeah, they're their own country, but stop lumping us in with Europe, like Europe and the UK, where we like the United States is its own thing. We're our own thing. We done too much ish in this world. Is that how y'all feel, or why y'all don't feel European? Answer in the comment section.
In the UK, if they feel European, and you'll usually just get a pause, maybe a vague shrug, or an outright no. And according to the latest Eurobarometer survey, 64% of people in the UK deny feeling European in any way. And so why is this? What is it that makes the British feel different? Well, most people don't really know. It's a feeling that if you really take the time to fully articulate, and many people will probably disagree with my take, but after thinking about this for some time, I think there are 6 main reasons which have contributed to this over time. Now, each one in isolation doesn't make the UK situation unique, but if you take all of these points together, I think it really goes a long way to explaining why this dissonance exists. So the first thing that makes the British feel separate from Europe is the geography. Now, I think this is pretty obvious. I'm sure you've heard of the island mentality before. The UK is physically separated from Europe, but it's not just the physical separation, it's what that separation allowed the UK to become. While Europe rose and fell through shifting borders and land wars, Britain had the luxury of distance. Britain didn't need to entangle itself unless it chose to, and that created a national psychology of watching from the shore, of stepping in only when it suited us. The English Channel isn't just a body of water, it's a psychological moat. It's a buffer between us and them. Now, the second thing which
That
sets
first one's good. That first one's real good. Geography, you don't really think about it, but that's true. They're kind of separated off. not connected to the European countries, not landlocked, but they're separated by water from all the other countries in Europe. And yeah, you can see them watch it from the shore. So geographically, they're already separated in a way. And they don't really, Europe problems ain't their problem. But when it best benefits the UK, the UK won't be there. All right, let's see number two.
UK apart is the empire. It
Agreed.
gave Britain a global identity. While
Mm-hmm.
European countries were rebuilding themselves after the war, Britain still saw itself as managing the world. Even though politically and economically Britain has lost relevance, culturally and symbolically it's more complicated. So historically, our focus has been outward, not inward. Our alliances stretch to places like India and Canada, Australia, not to Brussels or Berlin. Even today, many Brits still feel more at home talking to someone from Sydney or Toronto than they do to someone from Vienna or Barcelona. It's not just the language, it's the sensibility. The Commonwealth gave Britain a sense of being global, not continental. And I know that most people don't understand the Commonwealth, but all you really need to know is that while it has declined a lot, it is still in place. Some have joined it by choice, like Mozambique in 95 and Rwanda in 2009. And just like you can feel the remnants of communism in countries which were under communist rule, it is the same for Britain. You can still feel it in the national psyche, that lingering belief that Britain is more than just a European country. That is
Respect.
something else, that is something bigger. And I know many people mock the British for this. There's this certain sense of Schadenfreude now, that it's, declined. But even if that belief is no longer true, it's still deeply felt. Now, before we get on to the next point, which is revolution, I really want to take a moment to introduce you to the sponsor of today's video, which is
Sponsor.
Incogni. Incogni keeps you safe, private, and secure online. Your personal data is everywhere, and you didn't put in Germany at checkout to get 60% never had a revolution.
Number two, I kind of talked about the British Empire earlier, but yeah, them having such I mean, the biggest empire the world has ever seen, right? They put themselves on the map not as European power, but as UK, as the British. We're the Brits. So that also definitely would play a role.
We never had our Bastille moment. No guillotines, no radical upheaval of church or monarchy. Oliver Cromwell was very different to the revolutions in Europe because it was elite driven. It was not a popular uprising and it failed to do away with the monarchy. So most European countries had to reinvent themselves through force. But Britain evolved, slowly and reluctantly, choosing reforms instead of revolutions, adjustments instead of resets. We kept the monarchy, we kept our class system, we kept our continuity. And there's a deep conservatism at the heart of British identity, not necessarily politically, but psychologically. The British see themselves as the steady hand while Europe is full of fervid ideologies. We watch the continent swing from monarchy to fascism to communism and back again. And through it all, Britain stayed relatively stable. Britain wore that stability and sense of looking on from the sidelines like a badge of honor, and to a certain extent it still does. The fourth point to note is that the legal DNA of Britain is just different. The entire legal system is fundamentally different from that of most European countries. Britain runs on common law. Europe runs on civil law. And yes, before someone mentions it, I know that Scotland runs on a mix of both. But that difference is more than technical, it's philosophical. To cut a long story short, common law is bottom up. It builds on precedent case by case.
Okay.
It trusts the wisdom of history and the judgment of courts. It's built on real life events. Civil law is top down, it's codified, it's structured, and it's built from theory. This shapes how we think about authority, fairness, and rules. And so in Britain, the law is lived and interpreted. And in much of Europe, it's written and obeyed. And that's why British people instinctively bristle at bureaucracy and rigid systems and at rule by regulation. It's not arrogance, it's the deep structure of how the British think about freedom. And so perhaps, again, another reason why Brexit should not have come as a shock. The fifth point of
I
importance.
guess that does make sense. Yeah. Said the laws are just different, and the justice system. Said common law versus civil law. Obviously, I don't know too much about either. But the fact that the laws are different in the UK than the rest of the countries in Europe also, like he said, kind of goes to show you why the UK don't really consider themselves as part of Europe. That's another factor.
Is that Britain is one of the few European countries that still has a monarchy, not just in form, but in sentiment. And to be honest, I think many Europeans, and I would argue also Americans, kind of envy the UK for this.
Hmm.
In France, the revolution wiped the slate clean. In Germany, the Kaiser is long gone. But in Britain, the crown
Oh,
still sits
true.
at the center of national life, even if it's mostly symbolic. The monarchy connects the present to a romanticized past. And in a strange way, it reinforces our separateness. We don't just feel different, we're told that we're different by tradition, by ceremony, by the very structure of our state. And again, this is not about reality, it is about symbolism and belief. And then, of course, there is the language. For more on this, I did a whole video on how language is instrumental in nation building.
Okay.
But the fact that we still call it English and not American or Canadian or Australian or South African adds an implicit sense of ownership. English isn't just a language, it's an empire of its own. It allowed Britain to export its culture but also to insulate itself from others. Now, I've talked about how English is infiltrating many languages throughout Europe, but we don't dub, we don't consume foreign media. Millions in Europe grow up watching British and American TV. But in the UK, you would struggle to find a teenager who's seen a German film or a French series. Language is more than vocabulary, it's a worldview. And as I mentioned in the video that I did on language, it's far more powerful than physical weapons because the language is the vessel for the worldview.
Language being far more powerful than physical weapons is an interesting perspective. Monarchy, yeah, the rest of the world might be jealous of the fact that, right, y'all got a king or queen that run the country, and that's kind of how it was in different time periods. But I don't know. I feel like a lot of the world are happy with the systems that they have in place, and a lot of the world isn't. Tell me what y'all think in the comment section. But those are the 6 reasons that he gave. And in English, yeah, I mean, you guys did come up with the language, and we still use this language today. And probably the most common used language in the world, I'd assume. I could be completely wrong. So, but yeah, you guys.
And so when Europeans ask, why don't the British feel European? The answer, in my opinion, is very simple. Because Britain has spent centuries constructing a story in which Britain is not European,
I
not just apart, but different, more stable, more global, more measured, less ideological, less revolutionary, less continental. And that story may not be accurate anymore, but national identity is not based on accuracy. It's based on belief, on feelings, and on emotions. And the emotion Britain feels towards Europe is at best ambivalent. And so I
at
still
a
think
base
that most Europeans just don't understand this. And even after this video, probably might just be shaking your head in disbelief. This was my attempt to explain the cultural sentiment of the UK towards Europe.
We appreciate it.
This is not my personal point of view. I love Europe. I love the rich density of culture and language that this continent provides. I love Germany, and I think that the British have a lot in common with the Germans and also with the Dutch. But most Brits
Oh,
would not agree
also
with
with
this,
the
or even
Dutch.
if they did, they would not like to admit it. And so that is that. If you are interested, I also write. There is a link in the description below for my Substack. You can sign up if you want to hear more from me. Other than that, what is your take? I'd be interested to hear what you think about why the British see themselves differently. Let me know in the comments below. Other than that, take care, have a good day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
That was a great video. Now tell me if you agree or disagree with the points that he was making. Um, but yeah, the Brits. Hey, you say Europe and the UK. You don't throw UK in Europe, even though they are in Europe. That's all we got. If you guys enjoyed, please don't forget to subscribe, give a video a thumbs up, check out the next. I'll see y'all next time.